All right, guys, so as we move into the squat module, it's a good opportunity to talk about the fact that we're really not probably trying to introduce brand new exercises for you. A lot of these drills that we probably have done already are probably somewhat familiar in some form or another. The key, though, is how we actually gain the result that we all desire from these movements, and squats are a great example. I don't think there's anyone that would argue that squats are a really powerful exercise, whether your goal is more cosmetic-based and getting leaner or more muscular, or from a performance standpoint and being stronger and being able to perform in a sport at a higher level. So, in all these avenues, we want to be able to squat, and one of those avenues is in, injury prevention and reduction. So one of the reasons that we squat, and when I say bring up that last point right now, is because we squat with a very specific goal in mind, that we want a very upright torso in the squat. If you look at just the idea of squats in general, there's obviously lots of different techniques used and variations used. Our dominant goal, though, is to be able to perform a deep squat with a very upright torso. So why do we aim to do so? Well, having an upright torso is a great way to gauge ankle, knee, and hip mobility. That relates to having a lesser risk of having low back pain. So again, it's a very powerful way and screen to sort of see how you are moving and if you are moving well. Most injuries do occur probably because we're trying to stress the body as we have poor movement. From a performance standpoint and functional strength standpoint, if you want to jump high, if you want to run fast, then you need great ankle, knee, and hip extension, which obviously you have to have the mobility to stand for in the first place. So with that said, what we're going to look for with all these variations is, can we keep Jessica in a very upright torso position as she achieves a deep squat? For those of you that have done any type of training for quite some time, you know that most people, if you ask them to perform a bodyweight squat, you'll see something along this line. You get very frustrated, you go, oh man, this is going to be very difficult. You think you have to do an 8-12-week corrective phase before we can get people squatting. The reality is that most people do that because, again, as we've discussed, the dominant pattern when we do not feel stable is to create flexion. And so this is flexion all throughout the body. So most people just lack the body awareness, and they lack the stability and the strength to allow their bodies to move properly and to open up. All right? So again, our bodies are not apt to open up if we don't feel balanced and stable. So what we're going to start with is trying to teach the foundation of squatting well. And what we're going to look for is, again, a more athletic, or what we call functional squat. So yes, while there are powerlifting versions, there's all these different variations, we're looking to cover the needs of most of the clients who we're going to be working with. Unless you're working with a powerlifter, you're probably not going to take a powerlifting squat. There's probably better ways to stimulate glute and hamstring activation than doing a powerlifting squat, because, and before we get into the meat and potatoes of things, as you guys read in the manual, when we see a forward knee movement in a squat that freaks out so many people, or even in a lunge, usually people feel like we're going to destroy the knee. Research has shown that the stress upon the knee only goes up about 22% when the knee moves forward in a typical squat or lunge pattern, when you see that knee forward momentum. Conversely, if we go ahead and keep the knee from moving, so we have a very vertical shin, therefore we have to end up getting into that more classic trunk lean that a lot of us will see in a powerlifting type of squat. We get over 1,000% more loading upon the lumbar spine and the hip joint. So if you're going to ask me which one we'd rather have, 22% or 1,000%, I'm going to take the 22%, and that's well within the capacity of the knee. So my point is this, that everything has a trade-off, so you need to know these things to understand what's going to be most appropriate for your client. So with Jessica here, and Jessica's a great case study, because when Jessica and I met over a decade ago now, it's been a long time, she couldn't bodyweight squat without pain. Okay, so she has disc herniations, she's got limitations in her body from sports and so forth that have caused her now that when she did a basic bodyweight squat, she caused pain. When we taught her how to use her body properly to create stability, then she was able to squat without pain. And so a lot of this, as you guys know from the principles that we're trying to teach you, comes from using the feet first. Because we're in a standing posture, using the feet are very important. Now, getting people to understand how to use the feet, as we've sort of discussed throughout this program, can be a challenge. Don't mistake simple for easy. The idea of using the feet is simple. Getting them to do it properly is not easy. So one of the first things we can do is just simply get people out of their shoes. So for most people, they're in shoes. Either they have no connection to the ground because they're so soft, they're so pliable, or whatever it is, And they also are pushed forward typically on their heel. Usually the heel's a little elevated in most people's shoes, so they have a little bit forward lean to start with. Getting people to have ground contact is super important. Now that's only part of the equation because again, now people still don't know how to use their feet. We try to give you some strategies along the lines of this program, but we're going to give you a few more. So something we can borrow from the pressing section. We already did this a little bit in the pressing, was to put a lighter band around Jessica's feet. Now, when she does that, what she's going to do is she's just already taken a basically hip width stance, taken one step out to give her room in her pelvis to move. She's slightly turned her feet out to make more room in her pelvis. Now, there will be some people tell you should be able to have your feet right underneath your hips and feet forward and squat. Listen, there's probably some people that can do that, but I like to go and function off the 90% rule. 90% of the people cannot do that for a variety of reasons. One important one being a structural problem where the head of the femur can get jammed in the pelvis and just we don't have room in our pelvis to do so. So for our general purpose, we're going to take one step out from hip width, turn the feet slightly out. What that will also do is put tension on the band. When she gets tension on the band, she's also now got some tension in her glutes. And that's also why we have a secondary band above her knees that's a little heavier. So we don't need a ton of tension in the feet. You can always use more if people have bad feedback. So the cueing that we want her to have when we start teaching her to squat is she wants to, again, grab the ground with her feet or grab that band with her feet, keep the tension on her feet. And when she does that, it's going to have her turn her knees slightly outwards. And we're going to have her continue focusing on pushing her knees out as she descends into that squat. So really slow, just about 2 repetitions. Just keep pressing, break that band, break the band, and then push the feet, come up nice and tall. We'll do one more. Break the band, push the feet, get nice and tall. So hopefully you're listening to what I just cued her to do. Number one, we want to be concise with our cues. If I give her too many different cues to focus upon, she'll get overwhelmed and it'll be confusing into the movement. 1 or 2 cues we're focused on. Grabbing the ground with the band, pushing those knees out, trying to break the band. Most people will not push their knees out enough. Now you want to simultaneously keep tension in your feet because if I don't keep tension in my feet and I push out my knees, then my big toes come off, I roll my feet, I get in a bad knee position and I lose my stability and power. So grabbing the ground with the feet and pushing these out at the same time is going to be a lot for most of your clients, but that's why we're using feedback. Now you notice that she had a pretty good squat, probably deeper than most people would be able to do. Now what we took care of the bottom half, we got to take care of the top half because the squat is really a full body exercise. If you look at how most really strong squatters get prepared to squat, they create a lot of tension in the upper body and core first. And that's because we know already that the more tension we have through the core, the better all our extremities move. So one of the problems that we see when people squat like this is they don't know how to use their core in their squat. And yelling at Jessica to use her core more and more will not be effective. So we're going to use, a tool that we use from the pressing series. She's got it. Look at that. We're going to use our press out. So again, we can use these concepts for different goals because what we're trying to do is still teach the body the same thing. In the pressing section, we're using press outs to teach, to create tension from the ground, core, and lats. There's a lot of similarities here where we want to use the same thing. Plus, we'll get a little counterbalance to help her achieve a good squat. That infamous butt wink that everyone sees is generally a loss of core tension through the movement. So what I'm just going to do about 2 reps, focusing on the press out in a moment. Just a quick review though, she did a really good job. We're pressing from the belly button, not the chest. We want to have that nice L, so her elbows are in by her ribs, her lats are engaged before she starts. She's trying to actively break the back. So she wants to slowly move into the squat and time it so at the bottom of her squat, she reaches full lockout. To come back up, she's going to push her feet and pull the back into her quite greatly. So let's do that nice and slow, about 2 reps, Jess. And you see we get a very nice upright torso. Not only that, we don't get really the butt winks till almost the very, very bottom of the movement. So that's why that core stability is so important. So this will instantly take people into a good squat. They may not be as good as Jessica, but they're going to be tremendously better. And most of all, they're probably not going to hurt, which will only encourage them to do it more so. Before we move on quickly, we also want to talk about if you have someone who has a shoulder contraindication, pressing out is just not viable for them. Because you do need to use an appropriate load. Don't forget, with your client, if I give Jessica too light of a weight, she won't have enough resistance. She can simply create tension into the bag and keep her elbows in her ribs as she squats. And this still builds a pretty darn good squat. So again, creating that tension is going to be really important We can also turn the bag horizontally. She can grab the bag itself. Let's grab the bag itself just, and she can try to pull it apart. This might be more comfortable for some of your clients. And again, keeping that tension, keeping that core engagement is going to be very helpful. So in a moment, we're going to progress the squat pattern because this is going to be foundational. For some of your clients, this is going to be their squat for some time. For some of you that already have a very good squat, this might be part of your activation before you do other squatting movements. This will only reinforce and awaken good movement patterns and muscles in your body to optimize the squatting pattern. So throughout all our programs that we've done over the years, we always talk about using the right tool for the right job. And again, we sort of illustrate this concept already. We want to just reinforce it. So when we're talking about press-out squats, really the best tool to use is the ultimate sandbag. We'll show you the difference with the kettlebell. We'll show you the difference with a Leverbell in a moment. The difference is, first and foremost, if Jessica grabs this lighter kettlebell, is unlike the ultimate sandbag, all the way at the bottom. So with ultimate sandbag, we're grabbing in the middle, so it's kind of 50-50. So we have some weight distribution to our advantage. It's not all below our midline. That makes it a little bit less tension in the upper back. So for a lot of people too, is you'll have to grab a lighter kettlebell because of the leverage we're going to create, and because of the nature of kettlebells, smaller ones will place your hands closer together. And because the kettlebell is not pliable, it's much harder to create that same core, shoulder tension, lat tension, core tension. So even if I tell Jessica, if she turns towards me and tells her to break the kettlebell apart, you see that doesn't really pull her shoulders back to where we want her to be. All right, her hands are still pretty close. And even as she goes into that press out squat, just do one, just go nice and slow. Now, don't get me wrong, it's still a nice squat, but if you see what is actually happening in her shoulders because of her hand position, she's getting a little bit more into her upper traps instead of her lats, which is not what we want. At the same time, you know, what's a better tool for doing goblet squats is a kettlebell versus an ultimate sandbag, right? We can create some tension against the ultimate sandbag, but we want the weight distribution of the kettlebell and the ability to create that handle tension to help the goblet squat. The problem with the goblet squat for most people is when they'll give people a very light weight. If Jessica does a goblet squat like this, with this very light weight, it doesn't give her enough feedback and allows her to create enough tension to get the squat that we want to achieve with the goblet squat. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to make transitions. After we pattern and we build some good movement patterns with the press out, we want to start adding more load to the lower body because what's going to be the limiting factor in the press out squat is that leverage point. So bring the weight in towards the body, we can start loading the body a bit more. So Jessica's going to go ahead and going to grab the kettlebell in a moment. Now, a couple of key points here. At first, I'm just going to have her get in the position. We're going to talk about that, and then I'll have her come back down. So this is where we want to be in a good goblet squat. All right, we don't want to be holding the kettlebell. We don't want to be holding a dumbbell because what she's going to do is she is going to try to break the horns, the side handles of the kettlebell apart. And as she does so, she should feel a lot of that lat and core tension. And relax, Jessica. If she goes to hold the ball, so the bell's upside down, she holds a dumbbell like this, is that inherently horrible and wrong? No, but we are losing some key attributes, which is the tension and the lat connection we make to the core. So people always do better if they actually squat like this. What we're going to cue her on is when she's in that position, she's basically achieved plank. And what we want to do is we create and break the handle, and watch what happens to my elbows. My elbows will come into my ribs. And what we want to do is as she begins to squat, she wants to get tighter and tighter and tighter, elbows in her ribs as she's trying to break the handle apart. What most people will do is they'll hold the kettlebell, and as they come down, they'll allow the elbows to come out. They'll come out. They'll come out. Remember, we don't want chicken wing anything, right? Unless we're eating them. So that's a disconnect from that lat and core. If you're hitting your knees into your elbows, the problem is you're not getting tight enough. You're actually losing tension. So if Jessica comes back, she high pulls the kettlebell into position. She creates that tension. I want her to go just do 2 reps really slow, Jess. She's still focusing on the feet, bleeding the knees out, and she's getting a lot of that tension, pulling herself in. So her elbows are driving in, driving in, driving in. Excellent, and relax. So to benefit from the goblet squat, we have to take advantage of the opportunities that the kettlebell provides us in making those proper connections to the body. How we hold it, how we create tension against it, and still using the appropriate foot and knee cues are what's going to make this a great exercise. In the last few years, the Leverbell or the mace has become more of a staple in gyms, and you're seeing people do press-out squats with it. Now, of course, you can do press-out squats with a Leverbell or mace. It's not, again, wrong and evil to do, you're not probably hurting yourself. But let's look at the things that you may not be aware of and why we're seeing the ultimate sandbag still the better tool here. So Jessica gets in the position, very similar to the kettlebell, and even actually probably more so, her hands are stacked. And when her hands are stacked, it's very hard for her to get that shoulders where we want, right? Again, her hands have to be very close together. As she slowly goes down into that squat, as she presses out, watch the shoulder action. See how she's starting to shrug up the more she gets past that midline point. It's because of her hand position again. She still has a pretty good squat, but we're having a harder time engaging the lats into the squat, which is really what we're trying to achieve with that press out squat. So when people ask me, what tool am I using, why am I using it, I'm always looking at what are we trying to achieve in that exercise first, and what is the tool that's going to allow me to do it best. You notice that we're obviously integrating other tools, so it's not about promoting only ultimate sandbags, but it's understanding the differences so you can optimize them and be a master craftsman or craftswoman in what you do. So each of these progressions that we're showing you, there's obviously an opportunity to use more weight. Probably the one that's the most limited in using more load is going to be your press out squat because of the leverage we're creating. So, with the goblet squat, we can obviously use more load, but what we start to do is we start to find that there's always a limiting factor in a lot of these different variations. So for the goblet squat, for a lot of people, what gets them is just the heaviness in the arms. That the heaviness in the arms becomes far more limiting than what their legs can do. So instead of just trying to go heavier and heavier goblet squat, we have other squats we can use to start loading the body in better ways. And so one of those is our bear hug squat. And so for a lot of people outwardly, when they see the bear hug squat, they think it's the same as a goblet squat. And while they're very similar, they're both trying to use tension, they're trying to use the weight distribution to pull them down in a good squat, there are some subtle differences. One is, opposite of a goblet squat, the bigger and the heavier that the ultimate sandbag gets, the easier it is to make it a part of your body and to actually have stability with the implement. Conversely, if the ultimate sandbag is very light or very small, we can't create that tension. That's definitely where a kettlebell works better because we need to have the actual bag itself and the resistance of the bag to create that tension. So what we're going to do is we're going to have Jessica get in a good bear hug clean position, which is her starting about 50% over the bag or a little bit further. You never want to start too far in back of the bag because then you start reaching and leveraging through the lumbar spine. Now, when she starts, she's going to begin by grabbing the bag itself, but she's going to have a combination, kind of a hinge and squat at the same time because the range of motion is much lower to the ground. So let's put her in that position. Now, what she's going to do is she's going to pull against the bag first. Her arms are locked. See, she's a nice flat back. She's going to push her feet and catch the bag with one arm on top of the other. All right? So I want her to try to focus on breaking the bag apart. She's going to take that same foot position and very slowly, again, grab the ground with the feet, and as she goes down, she's going to push these out and pull the bag apart at the same time. Push to the ground and pull apart. We'll do two more just. Nice and slow. Creating that tension. See how vertical she is? And see how she ends up being more like a rocket and not an airplane. One more just. Tension, tension, tension. Pull, push, and then hinge and drop it down. Very nice. So, a couple things to look at. One is, notice when she did the pickup, that she did the side of the ultimate sandbag that had no handles. Well, I think Jessica and I have done numerous bear hug cleans where the handles have come into our body. We don't care. We don't think it's a big deal. If you have a client that doesn't find that comfortable, simply fold it back to the side that is flat. That way, that side is coming into your body. Other point, more importantly, is how she stacked her arms. You'll see people when they do bear hug positions do a couple things that are wrong that actually makes them lose some of the great elements of this position. One is they'll lock one arm into the other. So why is that not helpful? If you notice, Jessica had to do this motion. When she does this motion, you see what happens to my shoulders. I really engage those lats, the core all of a sudden becomes active. If I have one arm grabbing on the other, I don't have the ability to really do that, all right? You'll see other people do other subtle things, like they'll cup one here, they'll try to cup underneath to gain balance rather than understanding if they're trying to break the bag apart and they have the appropriate size load bag, they don't need to do this. This is a better position to be in. With that said, I'm sure there's some of you out there going, do you have to switch your arms over time? Of course we want to. I wouldn't get too worked up in that initially. Get people used to that position, creating that tension. And then, yes, from set to set, you can have them stagger one arm over the other because it will feel slightly different from the coordination standpoint. But most importantly, what we want you to understand is how load and the size of the bag, the fact that there's a dimensional component to the Ultimate Sandbag is something we can take advantage of to build another layer, because you can get to pretty heavy weights with this, really load the body in an effective way, but still keep the integrity of a good squat.